Guna.
Hey, how you doing?
Good. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, hear you
Yes.
just fine.
That's good. Looks like a very attractive farm on the side of the ocean there. I noticed your photos this morning.
Yeah, it's been 166 years in the family.
Wow, really? That's cool. Um,
Oh,
did you have any problems with the recent fires?
not recent. Those are all in LA. We're about 100 miles north. But we've had a fair amount of fires in the past, 6, 7 years. There's been multiple. So,
Yeah, that's so you're probably quite close to where he is, I'm thinking. Yeah, so tell me about, tell me, you've obviously had quite a lot of experience in this regenerative thing, but you've not been seeing any responses. Is that what I can take from it?
yeah, I basically know I'm making good compost. I'm testing it. I mean, I'm not doing a crop, so I'm basically rangeland, and I make a living doing custom woodworking and sawmilling. So it's not my bread and butter; it's more my passion. But I have put a lot into it, and I've studied, keyline and got a keyline plow and did, injected compost tea. I've done all these things, and there's there's some improvement. Like my dad's still here, and he has horses, and I hate horses. They're like the hardest animal on the land ever.
Yeah.
And so his paddock is just hammered, and the paddocks that I've been working on, they look way better. So it's not like I don't see any improvement. But that being said, I've been at it a decade. We still have a lot of mustard, a lot of thistle, and the grasses that we get, they're not good. They're the rip gut brome, and they're the foxtail, and just shitty grasses. So, um, and then this report, I probably should have done a comprehensive report like this. I got to tell you, going down the Elaine Ingham Road, I got steered away from the what I'd call the Albrecht
Mm.
Road, right?
Yeah.
And
But I'll be honest with you. Obviously, I'm sort of much more integrative, where it's all about minerals and microbes, and they're equally important and so forth. But that's why she's sort of lost. She was really quite popular here, and she's lost that popularity here thing. It's an equation that involves minerals and microbes. You've been doing a great job, by the sound of it, on the microbial side of the equation, but you've got some huge issues there that you have to have really specific strategies. I've worked with soils. I'll be honest with you. I've worked with soils in the dairy industry. It's not very often that you see that much calcium and that little of the other two cations, the magnesium and potassium. It's quite an unusual scenario, but you're going to be struggling because, potassium's a vegetative mineral. It's huge, and you've got so much calcium. Calcium's super antagonistic of the uptake of potassium. And you're on the back leg, and you've got this trace mineral deficiencies everywhere. And, the mineral side of it's been neglected. Have you done any mineral work at all?
no,
No, that's what's happening. You've just done one side of the equation. It's good that you've done that, but there'll be a huge. But the problem is that it's not just a case of topping up missing things, because whatever you do, you've got this inherent. You've got to face the fact that you've got this antagonistic effect of calcium. Like, I talk about calcium as being the Goldilocks mineral, that this you aim for your, say, 68%, just on that Albrecht style concept. But that kind of percentage of calcium, and if you haven't got it, then 7 minerals are directly affected, because it stimulates the uptake of 7 minerals. That's why they call calcium the trucker of all minerals. But if you've got too much calcium, either naturally or because you over-limed, then it's worse than having too little, because the same 7 minerals that it normally stimulates, it shuts down their uptake. Well, not only have you got that happening, but you've got very little of those minerals that it shuts down. So you're completely on the back foot, because you've got this high calcium that impedes the uptake of 7 things, and all 7 of those, literally all 7 of them, you're deficient in. So we're talking about magnesium, potassium, iron, several of the zinc, cobalt, molybdenum. All of those are impacted by too much calcium. So you haven't got them to start with, and then you've got this ridiculously high calcium. So really, in all honesty, I've advised dairy farmers who are, intentionally involved and struggling and banging their head against the wall, just trying to pump urea and doing all that sort of thing into the scenario. I've said to them, in all honesty, I'd sell the farm. This is for people that could. Obviously, it wouldn't be a consideration for you in your scenario. But where you're at, basically, and the only way you can address that, there's no point in trying to put some potassium into the soil. It's an expensive mineral because potassium's got a single charge, one charge, so it holds lightly to the negatively charged. It's got a positive charge holding on to clay colloid, and calcium's got two charges, and it just pushes potassium off the clay. So trying to address it, I mean, you might put a little bit down if you were, say, putting some with the elderberries, you might put a little bit into the scenario, but yeah, you've basically got the scenario. I mean, potassium as you're planting them or something, you put a bit under the plant, but really foliars, you just bypass those problems in the soil. But whether you're set up on that scale, how many acres is it that you're dealing with?
We're small time. We're just putting in 600 trees, elderberry trees,
Okay.
in a hedgerow type environment in a 13-acre paddock. That's like the one I've been nurturing the most. That's the one I've been giving the most care to.
Okay.
So these 600 elderberries are just going to be like along the fence line. So it's small, it's manageable.
Yeah. Yeah. So have you got the capacity to foliar spray or not? I mean, because I'll just give you an example. They're comparable kind of scenario in a tree cropping thing that I got a call from the head of the Truffle Growers Association from what's called the ACT, which is the little state where our capital city is housed. And he said, look, we've planted the two host trees, the hazelwood and the oak. And we've been 4 years, and 4 years is when you should start seeing truffles, and we're seeing nothing. And there's a big industry developed, and we're all getting nothing out of it. A truffle here and a truffle there, but a fraction of what we should be getting. Now, truffles are a form of, they're a mycorrhizal fungi that are fed by the plant, and they work, not like a parasite, but more of a synergist. But they're fed by photosynthesis, the plant's pumping down sugars and feeding them. And I asked them, well, how did you prepare the soils? And they said, well, we put 40 tons of lime on per hectare. And I said, what? And they said, we're trying to mimic the calcareous soils, which is what you've got. You could grow beautiful truffles there. But we're trying to mimic the calcareous soils of France, where truffles have been there forever and have been a hugely beneficial industry, a profitable industry. So we did that, and I said, well, what I'm going to see when I fly, because they wanted me to fly over and have a look and problem solve. I said, I already know what I'm going to see. I'm going to see pale colours, blotches, and stripes for the 7 minerals that calcium shuts down. And when I got there, that's exactly what I saw. And then we did leaf tests, and that confirmed, and calcium had just shut down those 7 things it shuts down when you've got too much of it. And the only way now they can do it, because and they said, those 8.9 pH soils and calcium. And I said, yeah, the plants, the trees, adapted over hundreds, if not thousands of years to those high pH soils. You can't just suddenly change the soil and whack that much of what is a salt, essentially. Calcium carbonates are still a salt, and totally overwhelm everything and shut down everything and mess up the whole system, including the biology. So basically they're left with, so I made them up a recipe that they could do themselves of the 7 minerals that were shut down. It's pretty hard. You've got to foliar spray. They didn't even have foliar rigs. They had to borrow things, but they foliar sprayed, the leaf greened up. The plant's now making more sugar to pump down and feed the truffles, and the truffles started harvesting the following season. So, but that's where you're at and why you're not getting production. It's just as absolutely crystal clear that without all of those drivers of productivity, they're not even there to start with, let alone the effect of calcium on when they are there. So you have to foliar spray. You have to get yourself a foliar rig, or however you're going to do it. And
okay, I have a 1,000-gallon water. We call it a water wagon. You tow it behind a tractor, and it's got a Honda gas-powered pump, and essentially like a fire hose. You can train it down, but would that be appropriate?
No,
we're talking more like
no, it's really important, because that's the soil application, essentially. When you foliar spray and you're talking about a mist, it's got to be a very small particle size to get into those tiny little pores called the stomates that are largely on the underside of the leaf. And so you need to have, there's a product here called the Tow and Fert that comes from New Zealand. A lot of Australians have got involved in that can it's got these huge churning machines inside the tank that basically you can put out liquid limes and manure and everything with it. But and they're saying, oh, we can spray, because there's this whole concept of foliar spray and urea as being a really sustainable way of applying nitrogen. But to do that, it has to be a foliar spray. And what they do, and I went to one of their field days, they had hundreds of growers there because it's become so popular. But what they're doing is not foliar spraying. And I said to the guy who developed it, you realize this is just a soil application. It's not 10 times more efficient, which is what foliar spraying is. And it's so important with urea because urea is the form of nitrogen called the amine form that you don't want in the soil because it converts straight through to the ammonium form and then to the nitrate form and then floods the plant with nitrates, which always go in with water and creates this dilution effect that is not necessarily good because it causes insects and disease and so forth because you've diluted everything else within the plant. But if you foliar spray urea, as the amine, it's 12 times more efficient. The amine just converts immediately through. There's no loss of leaching or volatilizing or, in Cuba, in organics, you're allowed to foliar spray urea no other way. You can't put it out in the soil, but you can foliar spray 10 kilos a week in certified organics. Urea is not a nasty thing if it's foliar sprayed. So, but it has to be foliar sprayed. You can't just squirt it out. And what they were doing was just squirt. Like people say, I'll put it through my center pivot. Well, that's not a foliar. That's a soil application. It has to be that fine mist to be able to get it.
Do you have a recommendation of a US that I could get, a foliar rig?
Oh, there's this all of the orchardists. I mean, it depends on which way you go because you can have a boom spray, which you'd have to raise to. Well, the trees are only going to be small at the moment, aren't they?
Yeah.
But I mean, the blow mist. I mean, I've got 2 farms, and one of them's has got stone fruit and apples, 18,000 apple trees, and so we've got blow misters that just send out this big mass with big fans on it and just blast out this big mass of a fine mist all over everything, sort of thing. It even gets the interrow, and I've realised that I've got a wasted an opportunity because we've got such rich, dense pasture in the interrow because of all the nutrition that's gone on with foliars that we're wasting it not having animals in there. So we're going to adopt this. We're changing that model, and we're going to have. It's a bit hard because you can't have more fruits on the tree because almost everything reaches up and eats half the lower fruit. But so we've got birds attacking the top and animals attacking the bottom, and you don't get much left at the end of it. So so we'll do it in the off season and bring animals in and do mob grazing and have that. Do you with your grazing? Do you have animals on the property currently?
Yeah, we have lots of sheep, some cattle.
And do you sell graze them or not?
Yeah.
Oh, good.
Electric fence. Move them around. That was a question I was going to ask you. If you foliar spray and you overspray and you have pasture, that's okay, right? That would
pasture loves it. I mean, foliar spraying used to be something that was the preserve of greenhouse growers and a few intensive growers, and now it's just become the broadacre growers. We work with a group called Vic No-till that are about, I think, probably about 1.5 million acres between them now, and they have very good conferences and so forth. But they have basically thrown away they've converted their fungicide reeds because it used to be spraying a fungicide every second week. And none of them use, most of the people I work with, none of them use fungicides or insecticides anymore. They just use nutrition and they foliar spray. And all their nitrogen goes out as foliar urea. They have these big 30,000 gallon tanks, and they put 30,000 gallon tanks, 30,000 litre tanks, and they put 8 tons of urea into every 30,000 litres of these big tanks, and they have a trash pump that sucks it out and recirculates it back in the top as it dissolves. And they dissolve it in those tanks, and then they add some humic acid to it, and they just foliar spray that. And they foliar spray 60 litres of that 1 to 4 mix, so it's equivalent to 15 kilos per hectare. But they only do that twice a season, and they get the same results as all the guys putting out, hundreds of kilos. So it's a really efficient way of applying nitrogen. And even in your scenario, if you needed nitrogen, and you've got a foliar spray rig, I mean, you can put it on the pastures, and it's a really healthy response. It's basically when you apply nitrogen normally onto the soil, the vast majority of it converts. There's organisms called nitrophine organisms, nitrophine bacteria, that convert the ammonium form of nitrogen through to the nitrate form. So most of what you put on this, when you apply nitrogen, goes in the nitrate form, and then it sits in the leaf. And for your livestock, you want it converting through to a protein. And interesting in your soils, and this is quite important, you need a little trace mineral called molybdenum, because there's an enzyme called the nitrate reductase enzyme that converts nitrates into protein, and you don't have any molybdenum. Your levels are real, they're not even, you can't measure below 0.05, and yours are all below 0.05. So there's literally nothing. You only need like 100 mils per hectare foliar sprayed out, but you could transform those pastures with foliars if you had the equipment to do it, and you could do it cost effectively.
And is your triple 10? Is that what has the micronutrients?
Yeah, well, that's got all. I mean, but from your perspective, I'm not trying to sell product. You can, whatever you can source locally, just knowing you need them. If you can source them locally, you can make your own mixes up. And you can add. That it's important that they're collated. So the concept of chelation is that if you've got only applies to positively charged minerals, but normally when you say you need zinc, and you do need zinc, and you just foliar spray some zinc sulfate, for example, which is just $1.50 a kilo, or in your money $1 a kilo, and you're only using 1 kilo per hectare, so that's like 1 pound per acre. There's the kind of amounts you use when you foliar spray, and almost everything's about that 1 pound per acre. The problem is that the leaf surface is negatively charged. In fact, the whole plant's negatively charged, and zinc is positively charged. It's called a cation. So it rushes to that little pore through which it goes in, the little breathing pore called the stomate, these little holes on the inside of the leaf. And it basically forms a bit of a traffic jam there because of the magnetic pull of negative to positive. And what chelation does, the word chelate means claw in Greek. And so basically the chelating, whatever you're going to use to chelate, wraps itself around the zinc or the calcium or the potassium or the magnesium, because they're all cations. It wraps themselves around and neutralizes the charge. So there's no rush, there's no traffic jam, and you get everything into the plant rather than blocking up those pores with the traffic jam. That's what's a simple explanation of why you chelate. So the simple, inexpensive way to chelate, you can buy your simple minerals, zinc sulfate, iron sulfate, the sort of things that you need, and you're using 1 pound per acre of each of them. And then you just put fulvic acid. You can source that locally. You just put fulvic acid with it. And fulvic acid is the most powerful natural chelating agent. So that then creates a zinc fulvate and a magnesium fulvate and a manganese fulvate and so forth. And that's how you would do it most cost. And the triple 10's got everything in it. It's why it took me about 2 years to formulate it. It's got, but you could probably do it more cost effectively by just sourcing things locally and just making your own brews up, because you can look at your soil test and know exactly what you need. You need some zinc, you need a little touch of molybdenum. So you buy some sodium molybdate and you put your 100 grams of that per hectare, which means 40 grams per acre, which is slightly more than an ounce per acre. And you can make up your own mix and say, okay, that's my mix for my block. And then once you get a foliar rig, you foliar spray it out on the trees and on the grass. They both need the same things. But the trees need much more potassium than. That's why my recommendations, which were more specific to the trees, were about, you've got no potassium to start with. You need to have, for trees, you need about 5 to 6%. You've got like point. I don't know what it was. It was just a look in front of me here, but it was really, really low. And you can't really grow trees without potassium. Like here, I mean, 0.58% potassium is probably the lowest I've ever seen in my life. I mean, it's really, really low. It's no potassium at all. So you couldn't grow. I'm looking at the first block there, which is P1. On the base saturation, it's got, you need 10, 12% potassium, magnesium, you've got 4, and you need, well, it says 2 to 5, but 5, 2 is for pastures, 5 is for tree crops, because they're woody crops that are potassium dependent. So 0.58, you're not going to grow much of a crop in there if you don't reduce potassium. And so that's why in that instance, I'll put a little bit of potassium sulfate, which is the form to use, because you need a bit of sulfur as well. And you can also foliar spray potassium sulfate, and that's why I've recommended that 8 kilos per hectare, 8 pounds per acre equivalent. Just roughly do that translation of kilos a pound per acre, roughly. It's not quite, but it's close enough. So, and then you just foliar spray that, and you do that on the tree crop, like once a month sort of thing. Because you've got nothing there, and you've got so much, and then you've got all the calcium shutting down what's there anyway. So you just bypass that whole system and put it straight into the plant.
And is it always fulvic acid and not humic acid?
It's a good question. But the problem is that this weird thing that together those two acids are called humates. But the way they're extracted is that you just take brown coals that are rich in those two natural acids, and then you've got to make them into their soluble form. And how you do that is that humic acid's only soluble. It's a natural acid that's only soluble in alkaline conditions. And so you use this very alkaline potassium hydroxide, and that's how it's the only way it can be soluble. It's all sodium hydroxide, but you don't usually want sodium in your soils. So you use potassium hydroxide, and you basically just mix it with the brown coal and water, and it solubilizes the locked up humic acid in the brown coal, and you've got this black liquid that you created. And then you can, and so both humic and fulvic are soluble in alkaline, so both of them are soluble. And then now you've got your black liquid, and then fulvic is also a natural acid that's soluble in acid conditions. So then you put something acidic into the mix, and this is just how it's made. You put it into that mix of black syrup, the black liquid that you've got, and the humic acid goes plop and turns into, well, you don't know what Vegemite is, but it's a famous Australian spread. It turns into this black gunk on the bottom of the tank, and the yellow-brown stuff on the top is this fulvic that is soluble in acid conditions because you just put an acid in there. And then, so you take the fulvic off, then you put some alkaline stuff in there and make it soluble again, the humic, and that's how you make humic and fulvic acid. But the problem is that the fulvic acid goes with everything. Humic acid only goes with alkaline things. And so there's almost nothing in agriculture that's alkaline. Everything's either based on phosphorus, which is phosphoric acid, sulfur, which is sulfuric acid, or nitrates, which are nitric acid. So everything in agriculture except for urea, everything else in terms of minerals is acidic. So nothing goes with humic. Urea and boron. So there's two types of boron. There's sodium borate and there's boric acid. So obviously the acid doesn't go, but sodium borate, because sodium's alkaline, sodium borate is what you would use if you were using boron. And again, 1 pound per acre. But that is compatible. So there's only two things that you can ever put with humic acid, and that's boron, sodium borate, and urea, which has got a neutral pH. And that's the only two things. Everything else falls out of solution. So that's what fulvic you put with anything with it. And you create a zinc fulvate or a manganese fulvate or a urea fulvate or a magnesium fulvate, or you've created a chelated form as soon as you put the fulvic acid with it.
Okay, so urea is always going to be sprayed by itself with humic acid.
No, you can still put humic acid, because you've got to think about the practical side of going across everything and spraying all the time, and there's diesel costs and there's labor costs and all the rest of it. No, you would just use the fulvic with the urea so that you can put all the other things that you need with it, so you don't have to do all those crosses across the paddock. Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
I wrote a couple questions. Let me make sure I get them all.
For sure.
My soil organic matter is super high. It's 6-7%.
Yeah, so you've been doing all the wonderful stuff from that perspective, which is really good. You haven't wasted your time with all the things you're doing, because that's a really good organic matter level, and that's an obvious, it's obvious your management's. That's what I'm saying. All the stuff you've been doing is one half of the story. You need to have. It's a two-part equation. So you've done a really good job on the. You've got Johnson says you've got everything in there. So you've done all the sort of physical things with Chelation and all the rest of it. But you can't do things without things don't grow without minerals.
Yeah. No, I missed the boat on that. Is there a best time for foliar spraying?
There is. Ideally, late afternoon or early morning, never in the middle of the day. And basically, the stomates, the little mouth that you're trying to get into, the stomates close up in the heat of the day. So you only go.
We get fog a lot, so like high humidity, those stomata are open.
That's good. Yeah. When you've got that happening, it's a good time. But you can do late afternoon, evening. Some people foliar spray at night or first thing in the morning. The best time to get it in there.
And my soils are very alkaline, high pH.
Yeah.
Basically, the takeaway is just address the plant through foliar and not try to figure out how to change my.
Sometimes people do. They've made a mistake and they've over-limed. There's a certain amount of lime that's appropriate to the soil based on how much clay is there that can hold on to the calcium, because that's how calcium's stored. And people, particularly if they get bad advice, someone says, "Oh, your pH is 5.6. You need 5 tons of lime or something," and 5 tons is a light soil that can hold 1.5 tons of lime appropriately, and now you've overdone it. Those kind of situations you can work in trying to correct them. But when you've got and naturally you've got what you've got is calcareous soils. Naturally, you haven't ever put lime on them, have you? That's
No.
just a natural. So you've just got these naturally high calcium soils. So it's
Yeah.
just like I said, it's one of the bigger challenges in farming when you've got those soils. But the only way that I've ever seen it work, like that guy, the dairy farmer that I mentioned, that I suggested, he sells broccoli. He said, "Well, what's my other alternative?" And I said to him, "Well, it's going to be labour intensive, but you've got to do foliars." But he continued, and he's actually been quite successful with that, with the foliars. So you can do it, and you don't want to sell the farm or anything. When it's literally generations, you just got to find a strategy that's going to work for you.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. Is foliar urea certified organic? Does that?
It is, and as I said, there's some countries that have. See, urea's the thing to understand is urea has been demonized by sort of organic groups and so forth. And I mean, we've got the largest range of organic products in the world, so I'm not anti-organics, but it's been demonized wrongly because it's just a natural compound. Urea is what's in urine. You know, that's why it's called urine, because the nitrogen that's in there is called urea. That's what it is. And what the organic people object to is that it's not harvested naturally. Obviously, they use this thing called the Haber-Bosch technique, which the Germans invented, where you need a lot of energy, and they use natural gas to pull it from the atmosphere and do this process to pull nitrogen from the atmosphere and convert it. But what you've got in the end is exactly the same compound as what's in urine. It's not nasty; it just wasn't harvested sustainably. And that's why organics don't allow it. But in Cuba, they're much more pragmatic. They say, well, it's a natural compound. You can't use more because it's easy to overapply. But if you grow vegetables, you're allowed to use 10 kilos only as a foliar. You can't put it in the soil, 10 kilos a week. And every veggie grower over there uses 10 kilos a week, because it works so well. So it gives you a lovely instant response when you foliar spray, because it just goes, it goes that. See, the thing is that when you're converting, nitrogen usually converts to nitrates. And when you've got to convert nitrates, what you want for your livestock and the health of the plants and for your productivity and your resilience, you want protein, you don't want nitrates. So first of all, it starts off on the leaf as a nitrate. Then there's this enzyme and this huge suck of energy, because it's the most energetic process of all processes, converting nitrates through to the first stage of protein. And the first stage of protein is called an amine. And then it goes really easily from an amine to an amino acid, then an amino acid to a protein. But urea is an amine. Urea is not ammonium, it's not nitrate, it's the amine form of nitrogen. As soon as you put it in the soil, it converts through to there's an enzyme that converts it to ammonium nitrogen instantly, and then bugs come in and convert it to nitrate nitrogen. So it's really, and then it leaches and off gases and floods the plant with water, because water always takes nitrates in. But when you foliar spray it as the amine, straight on the leaf, it's just click amino acid, click protein. There's no loss, there's no off gassing, there's no unsustainability. It's the best way you'll ever put nitrogen out. And you'll see it. If you try it in your pasture and things, you'll see this lovely response. It's just an immediate response. So because basically the biggest driver of productivity, I mean, it's obviously overused and misused and abused and caused all sorts of problems, but nitrogen is the most abundant mineral on the plant. And so what you're doing in a pasture scenario is that you've got to have a lot of legume, or a good percentage of legumes in the pasture, to give you the free nitrogen, because that's the normal sort of reliance. But those legumes, there's two things that they require. First, have you got legumes in the pasture or not?
I just cover cropped 2 days ago. We've had horrible rain year, and we finally got some rain. So yeah, I put a bunch of legumes in my cover crop.
Yeah, so the important thing is that you get on your knees, dig up once the legume's up and established, and you've got to have nodules on little balls on the roots. And that's about sulfur. And some of your blocks are deficient, some of the blocks have actually got enough sulfur. So you might have the nodules, but more importantly, and this is what I'm thinking will be your problem, those nodules, when you grab one of them and squash it on a sheet of white paper or cut it in half with a pocket knife if it's large enough, there should be this red color inside it. And the red color is called leg hemoglobin, just like our blood's called hemoglobin, the red pigment, but it's leg for legume, leg hemoglobin. And if there's no blood inside, if there's no red color inside there, then that legume's doing nothing in your paddock. See, legumes do four things, are really, really important in pasture. Obviously they fix nitrogen, but then they also release this acid exudate that breaks the bond between phosphate and calcium, because they always tie together. And in your case, you'd have a lot of that happening because you've got so much calcium. So you're struggling to get phosphate into the plant, but the legume makes plant available phosphate, because it breaks calcium and phosphate apart and makes the phosphate available. because phosphate has got 3 negatives, calcium's got 2 positives, and it ties up. It's called calcium phosphate. So even though you've got reasonable phosphate levels, there's a high likelihood that if you do tissue tests, plant tests, you'll see that the phosphate's not getting through because the calcium's tied up, and that's the other issue with high calcium. So the legume's really important because it breaks, and then the grasses next to it get their phosphate because the legumes providing it for them. And then the fourth thing that leaks, so you've got calcium, you've got nitrogen, you've got phosphate and calcium. I mean, you don't need the calcium, but you certainly need the phosphate and nitrogen. But then the third thing is, and now we're talking about biology, is that fungi, beneficial fungi, which are really important in all soils, and you're putting them in with the Johnson Sil and things, but their existence and whether or not they thrive, they love legumes because they love the acid exuded. So you've already got a problem with your alkaline soils that the fungi aren't that keen on. But the legume, under the legume, is if you check with a little tool called a microbiometer, which would be a good thing for you to buy. They're really cheap, only a couple $100 US, but they measure two things. They measure total microbial biomass, and they measure the fungi to bacteria ratio. And basically, the higher your total, really you're saying how big's my workforce, and the higher the microbial biomass, the better your paddock is. The best paddocks will always have the highest reading. And then you look at the fungi, and what you need in your situation is a 1-to-1 ratio. Even in the pasture, ideally you want a 1-to-1, and what you'll find is 90% bacteria and 10% fungi. So the legumes will feed the fungi. They hang out on. If you take that meter and you measure the roots of, say, ryegrass or any grass, and then you measure the roots of the legumes, because you measure the soil right beside the roots. You scrape off a bit of soil off the actual roots when you're doing the test. What you'll see is like 3 times more fungi on the legumes. That's what they like. But none of that will be happening. There'll be no nitrogen, no free calcium, no free phosphate, more importantly in your case, and no fungal stimulation unless there's red, because the red color means they're fixing nitrogen. And if they're fixing nitrogen, then when plants take in a cation, so whether it's calcium or magnesium or potassium or ammonium nitrogen, which we're talking about in this case, they've got to balance themselves, and they spit out a cation. You wouldn't spit out another nutrient. So when you're making ammonium nitrogen through nitrogen fixation, which is what the red pigment's telling you is happening, then that positively charged ammonium nitrogen comes in, and you've got to balance yourself. So you spit out a non-nutrient mineral called hydrogen, and hydrogen's the acid mineral. It's got no nutritional value, but it's super acidic, and that's what the acid exudate is. So, but what determines that red color is that little trace mineral called molybdenum, which gets shut down by calcium, and you need to have 0.5 of part per million, and you've got not even measurable levels of it. So even though you put those legumes in, they'll be basically a waste of space parasite in the paddock if you don't get some molybdenum onto them, because they won't have that red pigment, and none of those benefits will be happening. So it's really important thing to understand.
I understand the fine mist of a foliar for, say, the tree crop, but that trash pump 1,000-gallon tank
it's the same story that you've got the leaf of the grass or the legume with these tiny little pores on it, that you're trying to get these tiny droplets into those tiny pores. When you squirt it out, it's just a soil application. If you say you've got a veggie garden and you just put some nutrition, some fish or some kelp or something good into the watering can and water it on, nothing goes into the leaf. Even though you just water it all over your leaf, none of that droplet size goes in. It's only foliar sprays about fine mist.
Interesting. Okay.
One thing you could experiment with if you had the finances is that there really is pretty compelling evidence that drones are going to be a huge part of that foliar application. I mean, it's just everyone's experimenting with it.